Welcome to Design Talks Now, hosted by Design Pavilion. I'm Eileen Shaw, producer of Design Pavilion and Design Talks, exploring current tones and shared human experience as we face a drastically changed world. While protesting for civil rights is an ongoing struggle spanning history in our country, modern-day designers, artists, and writers are connecting humanity through heroic storytelling, comedy, and action figure roleplay. We'll hear from three heroic artists today in the entertainment industry as they explore how storytelling bridges human connection. It can elevate and honor difference and diversity through humor and delight, thereby engaging and validating, empowering and encouraging confidence and positive future projection in our youth that can last them a lifetime. We all remember our childhood heroes. Who did you identify with? The speakers today will discuss how play and comedy and storytelling can help to serve racial and social awareness. Joining us are Sean Martinbrough, author and artist for Marvel and DC Comics, and David Vonner, designer for Hasbro and Mattel, and Joe Miles, writer, actor, and improv comedian, with moderator Garrett Johnson of Garrett Design, a strategist and visual designer. They're going to put a smile on your face, and they're going to make you think. So now, let's begin.
Thanks, Eileen. It's great to be at Design Talks Now. Hi, everyone. I'm Garrett Johnson, creative strategist in brand development. I'm excited to be here today in conversation with three exceptional artists sharing their careers and perspectives in the entertainment industry about how storytelling can serve inclusion and social unity. It is my pleasure to introduce Sean Martinbrough, the author of How to Draw Noir Comics, The Art and Technique of Visual Storytelling, published by Random House and reprinted in several languages. He is a critically acclaimed creator and artist whose DC Comics, Marvel, Dark Horse, Skybound, and Image projects include Batman, Detective Comics, Luke Cage Noir, Captain America, The Black Panther, Hellboy, and Thief of Thieves, written by Robert Kirkman. He's co-created characters featured in the films Deadpool, Justice League, the animated Batman Gotham Knights, and Fox television series Gotham and The Gifted. Sean's work has been covered by USA Today, BBC World America, and the New York Times, among others. He is the artist of Prometheus 1313, presented by Comixology and French publisher Delcourt. And he is currently writing the two-part story Red Hood for DC Comics, illustrating a children's book, Like Lava in My Veins, as well as writing and illustrating his first creator-owned graphic novel for the new Abrams book imprint, Megascope, funded by New York Times bestselling author John Jennings. Sean has given many lectures through his career, including TED Talks Mid-Atlantic, which explored storytelling and themes of inclusion.
My love affair with comics started in the 1970s. I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in the Bronx, the neighborhoods of Soundview and then Co-op City. It was a really fun childhood. It was actually, my neighborhoods were very diverse. In Co-op City, you had Jews, Italians, Irish, Hispanics, Black folks and Asians, and it was a really fun environment. Like my crew of friends and I we used to ride our bikes around. We used to get into trouble. We were responsible for property damage. Even saw a dead body. It's almost like the movie Stand By Me, only with open fire hydrants and people of color. That's a different TED Talk.
Be sure to check out the upcoming September 2020 issue of Vanity Fair, where Sean is featured contributor, guest edited by renowned journalist and writer Ta-Nehisi Coates. David Vonner, co-founder and co-president of Top 5 Toys. David has designed some of your favorite toys, action figures, and collectibles. From the rock band Kiss to your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and the superstars of WWE, David has designed and developed products for notable companies such as Spencer Gifts, Marvel, Spin Master, Hasbro, and Mattel, work that has generated hundreds of millions of dollars in sales revenue. As a 20-year toy industry veteran, David was also involved in the design and development of the widely popular 6-inch collection figure line Marvel Legends, as well as the creation of 3 3/4-inch Marvel Universe action figure line, many of which has led to the current superhero genre films and toy boom many of us enjoy today. Having received various toy industry awards, David most recently served as Mattel's design manager, overseeing WWE, and is a pop culture fanatic that loves to be a kid at heart. David can also be seen discussing his love for pop culture and toys in the Netflix docuseries, The Toys That Made Us. David, along with 4 Entertainment and Toy Gurus, have created Top 5 Toys launching in 2021. Joe Miles is a Brooklyn-based comedian, writer, actor, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. His laid-back delivery of offbeat humor has entertained crowds across the country.
Were you in Baltimore did you ever do a festival in Baltimore?
Never been to Baltimore.
The basement of a bakery. You were doing a show and you committed real hard, too hard I thought, and you came out with your pants down and you tripped and you fell and that scream is still in my head, the scream that you made. I think about that scream every time I think about screams. And you were like, everybody get out. You kicked us all out of the bakery and it was like, that wasn't even your show. You made everybody leave.
Definitely was not me.
I'm pretty sure it was you.
Pre-quarantine, Joe could be seen regularly on stage in New York. Now, not so much. However, his Instagram and social media dispatches are on point. Check him out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Mr. Joe Miles. Guys, welcome, and thanks so much for being here. Each of you has established a significant position in the world of pop culture entertainment, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I think first off, it would be very interesting to hear from you what stories, toys, or pop culture icons did you enjoy as a child and still influence who you are in your career today? David, let's start with you.
Well, growing up, I'm a kid of the 70s. So, it wasn't really a lot of African-American, guys on TV that you could really, aspire to be like. But my guy at the time was the $6 Million Man. I love the way he dressed, the way he moved in slow motion and everything. And also the background music, which was actually very, with the congas and everything, like very almost, jazzy, urban, Afrocentric kind of vibe and everything. The only other person on TV that was aspirational at the time was actually J.J. Evans from Good Times. For me, being an artist, that was really the only Black artist that you ever saw on television. And then when I found out that art was done by, Ernie Banks and everything, and then he was a former football player, that really led me to understand the history behind the art of the show and gravitate more towards art.
Incredible. Sean, I think you have a few similar heroes there. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, David just brought back memories with the $6 Million Man, because my mom and my dad can tell stories about how when that show used to come on, I used to do like the slow motion run with better, stronger, faster, dun, 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 dun. You know what I mean? Like, it's so interesting because I'm a child of the 70s too, and I'm a native New Yorker. It's amazing when you think back to all of those shows and those movies like $6 Million Man, like Star Trek, the reruns, they used to come on. And then you had Star Wars, which was like a huge thing on the big screen. Those images are burned into my head to this day. It's amazing how you can see something from such a young age and it can have such an impression on you as a storyteller. And it really just inspires you to start telling your own stories. And then eventually, you kind of come up with your own stories, your own characters. And I always say that I just absorb inspiration from everything around me, be it television shows, books, other artists, music, videos, commercials, advertisement. These are things that I just pull from all the time. So I'm totally like a sponge when it comes to just being inspired by things around me.
That's awesome. I love it. And it's so evident in your work. Joe Miles, tell us about your unique storytelling and how you approach that through the heroes of your childhood.
I mean, Thundercats was big for me when I was a kid. So I don't know if that influences my comedy, but I love Thundercats. X-Men in the 90s, that cartoon that they had, that was big for me. I think like for everybody, the outcast element of the X-Men story is something that was big for me. And then the Ninja Turtles movie, maybe. I was like a little cartoon and superhero nerd when I was a kid, so.
To Sean's point, like the 70s and 80s were really like pressed upon us. It was a lot of creativity that was going on, based on the whole studio setup from generations past and the work ethic that was done in Hollywood and guys trying to break out of that, like George Lucas and Stanley Kubrick and guys like that. And it was just an amazing period to really grow up with not just the movies, but like the cartoons and everything. And it was really like a wide open landscape of how you can engage with audiences. So it was like a wide variety of like sci-fi, comedy, and animation, like really that isn't happening right now, but you can see that there's a thirst for it right now because content is so key.
And also, what's interesting, it's like the corporations hadn't sort of caught up to the creatives. So the
Right.
creatives got a lot of things that the corporations were sort of slipping by the corporations, but now today everything is very corporate driven, market driven, testing. Whereas when we were growing up, like Joe mentioned, the Thundercats. Now, did you guys see that recent thing that went viral where someone did a 3D version of the opening?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Okay, you gotta Google that because that was good. And this is how detail oriented I am. It was good. The only thing that didn't translate as well was when Mumra transforms and all of his capes and all of those
It's flaring all around.
that didn't translate as well. But the thing is, back in those days, you had a lot of Japanese imports.
Exactly.
So things like that, first of all, these days, if you go to like an average bookstore, there's a whole anime section. Back in our days, you had to go to Chinatown, like in those little, yeah, basically those little nook and cranny shops to buy Japanese anime books.
Yep.
And in those cartoons, a lot of them were Japanese imports. So
Yep.
you had Thundercats, you had Mighty Orbots,
Yeah.
you had like a lot of things that were coming over that we were growing up on. That stuff just really inspires me to this day.
Yeah. Even with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, there was a period when they switched over production and they went with a Asian crew. And I think it was with the origin of Firestar, where you can actually see
There you go.
transformation in the animation. And it was just, that stuck with me so much, and just that look, that flair, the style, the fluidity of the animation of the movement of the people. Like you could tell that it was definitely something on the horizon, that led to like Ninja Scroll, and that was like complete shutdown.
And that's why I couldn't get with a lot of the cartoons that came out in the 90s, like the X-Men cartoon.
Yeah, I couldn't either.
I couldn't
couldn't
the
either.
animation was garbage. It was just garbage.
It was too American. I mean, it's sorry to say, but it was like too American.
This energy around storytelling, I feel like the 70s and the 80s, it was all open field, and there were so many creative people in the industry, and they were able to tell these stories, and they didn't really know, they didn't have anything to go from before, and there wasn't a template for it. So they were really shooting out these stories that culturally have so much to do with us in our careers and as designers and how we approach storytelling and how we can craft culture through storytelling. I mean, this is self-evident is how much we're influenced by these stories. And you had both mentioned, Sean, you had mentioned even in your TED Talks, the $1 Million Man and the slow-mo and all this stuff and how that influenced you. So it's so clear. It's so clear that storytelling really does determine how we move forward, how it affects our culture, how we act and behave amongst other people. And even when you mentioned X-Men, whether you like the stories or not, this idea of people having unique qualities that are considered freakish or makes them different in society ended up elevating that story, and these ideas of difference really brings us together and makes us awesome. So I love that.
Yeah.
And
I just found out that the animation was garbage just now in this moment. I didn't know that.
Yo, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that are like, we love those cartoons.
Yes.
We love those. Me, I'm just like,
I mean, I was a kid, I was like, I don't know, it was the early 90s, so I was maybe 10. So, it's, and I'm not an artist, so animation on my radar was like probably lower down than the story that I was seeing. And the fact that it was the X-Men, I used to read the comics, so seeing it on screen and having a big bowl of cereal and watching it was like, it's a different experience.
I'm curious though, like when did you, like comics wise, so you read the comics, when did you jump on to the comics? Was that before the cartoon or after?
I was always into comics. I've always loved comics. I still do. It's just that, it's so many of them that it's hard to like keep up with now, but especially the X-Men. So that was a big one for me anyways.
Gotcha.
Yeah. When you talk about the story, it really not only, for me growing up being a big Marvel fan, it was like, one of the reasons why Marvel really broke through is like, not only did they tell stories, but the guys who were creating the stories, the artists and the writers and, you know, the editors, the painters, everyone, they were all kind of infusing their own personal elements into the story. And that's like, for instance, like with Iron Man, like one of the reasons why it worked so much, you know, the whole demon in the bottle thing is because Bob Layton was actually going through his bouts of alcohol. You know, he was infusing a lot of his own personal tragedies and triumphs into the story arc of that, you know, character at the time. So it really matters who is behind the storytelling of the story, you know, because when you can bring those different experiences, different cultural, you know, bridges and everything, when you can bring that to, you know, to the essence of the story, now you have something unique. And I think that one of the reasons why certain entertainment kind of like failed in a way is because there was just one particular type of person doing the storytelling. And that became, you know, kind of saturated and stale when you have different people of different backgrounds who have different nuances of stories that can really push the genre forward.
What's interesting about that point about Marvel, like I was more of a Marvel guy. Like DC was, I like DC too, but Marvel to me in terms of consistency, what was interesting about Marvel is that the Marvel universe is pretty much set in New York. DC's universe is set in like parallel, they're like sort of odd variations of New York, like Metropolis and Gotham, where they are New York, but they're kind of not. But the interesting thing about Marvel is that they always had this interconnected universe where, since Marvel Comics was based in Manhattan, and most of the artists and writers they employed were in the New York area, that's why Spider-Man, you know, he's from Queens, Captain America's from Brooklyn, Tony Stark had his offices in Manhattan, the X-Men are in Westchester.
Captain America used to draw for Marvel Comics.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like Doctor Strange lived in the Village.
Right.
So they had this sort of organic New Yorkness of them, and being a New Yorker, I'm like, okay, I totally get it.
Right.
These were a bit more grounded. Now, DC had some hits. They had sort of things that, like certain character arcs and story arcs that were great too. But in terms of consistency, I think Marvel really pulled me in because also, for me, I started as a fan. I went to Fiorello LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, and I was an art major. And that's the Fame School, for those of you who don't know, and that's based in Manhattan. I had friends, we were all comic book heads. And my friend said, hey, listen, I take like a free cartooning class up in Harlem at a nonprofit called the Children's Art Carnival. You should really come. So I said, okay, cool. And that's where I met two of my mentors that I always give credit to. Because the Children's Art Carnival, like I said, it was a nonprofit, and you would have Black professionals come in and teach free classes. I took a cartooning class and an illustration class. And the cartooning class, my teacher was this guy named Michael Davis. And then I took an illustration class that was taught by Gil Ashby. And they had very two opposing viewpoints, or at least focuses, when it came to art. Gil was the purist. He was like, you have to learn how to draw, foundation, perspective. Davis was like, this is a business. It's a hustle. It's a business. It's a hustle.
Keep it going.
You know what I mean? And the thing about Davis is that he introduced the class to working professionals that were friends of his at Marvel and DC. So I had like this fan perspective where I grew up reading comics, but now I was actually meeting the people that drew and wrote the comics, which was like, wow, okay, so that sort of gave me like a whole grounded perspective that these are real people that are drawing, that are working on these books, and they can actually make a living doing this because they were doing really well. He introduced us to Walt and Louise Simonson, who are comic veterans. To all you civilians, Walt Simonson wrote the definitive arc of Thor.
Of Thor, yeah.
Those movies, they're based on Walt Simonson's run on Thor. In fact, he has a cameo in the first film. And his wife was writing X Factor, which was a spinoff of the X-Men. Two of the nicest people you could ever meet in comics. And I remember they invited us over to their house on they had like a Central Park, like an apartment on Central Park West with a dope view of Central Park. And I was like, wow, these people are actually making a living working in comics. And that, to me, just solidified that I could do it. And I think that that's just very helpful, not only to sort of fuse the dreaming fan aspect of me as an artist, and then seeing people that are actually doing it.
Right.
Think, that
totally. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is like having those role models, especially, that you could culturally identify with. in Harlem, and having those resources to be even taught art is incredible, especially in that decade. Joe, do you have anything to add to that? Like, who are your heroes, or how did you see role models that helped you get to where you wanted to be in comedy and in the way that you tell stories?
I got into comedy a little bit later. I didn't get into that until I moved to New York. So for me, I always liked to be funny when I was younger. But it was, people I knew. My uncle was really funny. He was like just super quick. I grew up in the Midwest. And I'm mixed. So that was not common in the Midwest in the 80s. So it's like humor was big for diffusing tension and, getting people to not beat you up. You know what I mean? So it's like that was always something I developed. And then when I got here, I was like, oh, I'm actually, I could do this. There's comedy things going on everywhere. I was jumping into. Right now, I guess I would say like people I look at as role models for me would be other people who kind of look like me. Maya Rudolph and Key and Peele, or like seeing what they were able to do, where it was they were kind of didn't really look like any one thing. And I always thought there would be something that would hold you back, but they were like people who were kind of took it and made it an advantage,
Hey, I have a question for Joe, because, it's interesting. Since I went to a performing arts high school, I used to always feel whenever we would have assemblies and the music majors would play or the vocal majors would sing, I would always feel like art is kind of boring and it's kind of static compared to you guys that are actually performing, like with an audience. How does that feel, man, when you're going out on the stage and you have to grab people's attention like in 2 seconds? Otherwise, they're going to be like, ah.
Well, I think it depends on what your art is, if they're going to be like that. I'm not a very, electric personality. So I expect that 2 minutes in, they might not be fully sold. So for me, it's like, that's kind of the fun of it, is to kind of just like a slow burn. I might start off with a joke they don't even know where it's going, and it'll take a while to get there, But I mean, it's exciting for me. It always has been. I started out doing music, and I always enjoyed getting up on the stage. Like, I didn't care how they felt about me. I was like, as long as I'm just doing it, then I just feel like it'll come. Probably the same as like what you were talking about. Just perfect your craft in your eyes, and I feel like people will gravitate towards it,
So do you practice? Do you do you write out your material beforehand, or are you like going off the top of your head freestyle?
Sometimes, I do improv too. So when you do that, you're going out there with nothing. And that to me is the most exciting. It's not super lucrative, but the rush of that, of just walking out there, you don't know what you're going to say. Nobody knows what you're going to say, and you build a whole show from scratch off of one suggestion. That to me is like the most exciting kind of art that I do.
You have this way of making people work for it. You kind of you're soft, you're quiet, you pull people in, you get them to listen to you and follow you in this slow build. And then you also expose this grievance. There's a punch in the gut with your sense of humor that lets us know there's something wrong. It doesn't soften the blow, but it makes us laugh at it almost in the way that we agree with you that this is wrong. And you have been able to make some political statements through that comedy, through that slow build, through that quietness that you have, that I feel like, and the improv too. I mean, you just come off the cuff. Even on Instagram, you're just kind of throwing it out there, and it's like, where is this guy? And it's an incredible way of storytelling. And I think that's something that you kind of have in line with David here and Sean, is this unique personal way. Like we were talking about, you get these people who have these life experiences that really inform the work and make that work unique and valuable in culture. And that's what you guys are doing. It's absolutely incredible.
It's funny because like how Joe utilizes social media, like right now, because content is so key, the situation that we're all in globally, it's kind of like the 70s in the 80s with public access TV. Like you had all these different local stations and characters and personalities, like kind of projecting what was going on in society. And now you kind of see that now with the power of content and the need to have content now. So what Joe is doing is falling right into that, because no one can stop you. No one can really censor you. No one can limit you. And it's all about what it is you want to put out there and your time.
the pandemic is obviously mostly bad, but I mean, for some creative content, I think it's kind of good because it's like Wild West out here. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody's figuring it out at the same time. So it's
Exactly.
like there's no real difference between what a big corporation, how a big corporation is handling it, and how just one guy doing it by himself is handling it, because we're all
Right.
figuring it out at once.
Going through the corporate, hoops, they have to go through levels and levels of approval to exercise their voice. And basically it all comes from a misunderstanding of branding because, now in this day and age, you have to be very nimble, be on top of it and be very aware of what's going on. But, the power of just leaping on things at the moment and being the voice of the situation, and being the voice of the people. Like, that's what we need now. That's what's happening. And that's kind of like where the larger companies are. You see they're failing because they can't get their message together. They can't do it.
Totally. Well, and it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I know your background is like Mattel and Hasbro, and those are all great companies. I remember visiting you guys in Hasbro years back when David was involved with that. And it does take a long time to move a big ship there, to make these decisions. And even in speaking with Mattel recently, they are moving into more inclusive toy designs, but they're moving very slowly. It takes so many people to make those decisions. You're launching your own new company, Top 5 Toys. Are you seeing these opportunities and ready to jump on these? Like, where are you thinking in that way now that you've had all this huge background in the history of your work?
It's a complete open white space, for the opportunity for us. It's amazing, like working at companies like Mattel and Hasbro, they have, like you said, it's a big ship. But at the same time, whenever, we have movie properties going on, we can adjust and adapt very quickly. So it's like, why can we adjust and adapt quickly to that, but not to other things? And you really got to see with the explosion of Black Panther, that kind of opened up the door in a wide variety of ways, not just, with, the representation of these characters, but also how, the company can pivot. A company can pivot and include minorities, and minority product does sell, so we don't have to go through this whole rigmarole of, the data through the sales about African Americans or certain ethnic groups, their products don't sell or anything like that. Or we have to go through the focus groups of, who wants to see this and how is it not offensive and anything. Like, to me, that's just more and more excuses that get into the way of putting out product that represents the people. So, what we did based on my experiences, and also we have a classic hip hop artist who also went through his trials and tribulations in the industry, and then 3 other artists who really suffer from the lack of information. And that right there is more devastating than anything, when you can deny groups the information that they need to go to the next level, to do whatever it is they want to do. Taking all of that into account, we said, hey, we're just going to go and plow forward. And our mission statement is to bring diverse product to diverse people, focusing on African Americans and other minorities. And the landscape is just so wide open. I mean, we can go all day with, blaxploitation, athletes, sci-fi, TV shows, and then we can go into karate movies, and the Shaw Brothers catalog. I mean, it's so wide open that we can really tap into, that's really been ignored, but has also been an inspiration for pop culture.
Totally. Black Panther, I get the feeling they didn't expect it to do as well as it did, and it really resonated across cultures. Everybody loved that movie, and I don't think they expected it to be as big as it was, and it affected fashion. It affected futures work. I remember seeing predictions from Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies, Afro-tech and Afro influence in modern technology and things like that, and then hitting fashion. I remember predictions from WGSN and Fashion Scoop, so it was hitting culture in a big way.
Right.
Sean, you worked on Black Panther. What is your perspective on that? And I know, Joe, you have some interesting insights on that too, and I think it's just great to kind of hit on that, because it did explode it into white culture as, hey, this is something awesome that we can all resonate with. And that was huge, whether you agree with the commerciality and blaxploitation aspect of it or not, it made a difference.
Yeah, I think that I think the companies were really caught off guard with how successful and what the demand was with the Black Panther movie. There was a big after the fact rush to get merchandise out and to get tie-in books and all this stuff, because even like from Marvel Publishing to the studios. And listen, I think that Marvel Studios did a good job with it. But I don't think that they expected it to be the phenomenon that it was. And I think that, a lot of that has to do with the decision makers needing to be more diversified. And I think they're slowly but surely getting it through their thick heads that, yeah, you know what, this is not only good for society, but it's good for business. Because when you have people that are working on your staffs that can say, there is a market for this, you better get ahead of the curve, then you're going to make more money. You're going to make more merchandise with that kind of stuff. So for me, I was really, first of all, I was blown away by the movie. It was funny because I was fortunate to get invited to the premiere out in LA, and they gave my ex and I like passes to go. So, we just flew ourselves out there and went in. And so we're there in like the big studio at the premiere, and it was so like electric, the energy inside the theater. And when the movie first started, I was kind of like, because it starts off a little basic, like a little kind of low key. And I was like, oh Jesus, come on, guy, don't let this suck. Come on. But then as it went on, I was just really blown away by all of the different topics they were touching. Yeah. I mean,
that was sensitive. That was sensitive to us. And that really goes to show when the curators look like you and they understand the struggle that you've been through, because just the topic of the relationship between Africa and African Americans, that right there is a very tense, unspoken relationship, and how it all transpired, like with slavery and everything. And we always kind of felt lost. Why didn't my cousins, my uncles, my brothers come and help me? Yeah. And so that's why when Killmonger said that, I can never view him as the villain. Never. No. He's probably Marvel's greatest hero in my eyes in cinematic form, other than Blade.
I'm so glad you said that. That is so incredible. He's the first villain I feel like you can actually identify with and see how he got to where he is, and you feel for him at the end.
Right.
He can't go back on what he knew, what he decided, how he felt about it.
Right. I mean, those are the things that Malcolm X were saying to previous generations, and what was said to us, in very different and subtle ways, but it all culminated to that moment. Like, we were left behind. Yeah. And we struggled, and you knew it, and you did nothing. And that, I had tears in my eyes when I watched that movie, like tears, because that was the only way that message could be told.
Yeah, and they put it on T'Challa. He actually is sort of like the bad guy, because he's the establishment. At the end, he comes around, but it was so brilliant, and the effect of it, to see Black Americans and like David says, like there's always been a divide, and that's been by design, to separate African Americans from Africans, those two cultures. And to see African Americans embracing African culture, going to movie theaters in African garb, you would never have seen that in the 80s, you know what I mean? You would never see that. And for that sort of connection to happen was so deep on so many levels. I think that you only get authentic product like that when you have people that are directly connected. It can't be people from the suburbs that kind of read something somewhere or have a friend that is of that thing, and they're going to try to pull from that. It makes sense to have people that are of the culture or of that particular group speaking to it and creating the content and greenlighting the content. Even if you don't have the social consciousness about you to do it, it makes business sense.
Exactly.
Well, that's an incredible point too. You mentioned the greenlighting, that, like how you talked in your TED Talks about adding a person of color into the characters, and they said, they let you do that, and you weren't sure if that was okay. I don't know how the storytelling developed and whether they had to kind of constantly get validation and say, this is going to be okay, this is going to be okay, and what they might have cut out even. They did create this meaningful story, and to green like that took a lot of courage if they understood the gravity that it was about to happen, which maybe they didn't, but it was huge.
Yeah. Well, because I was going to say, like, I always get asked, like, hey, Sean, working in comics, is there racism in comics? I'm like, well, there's racism in the world. But what I tend to find is that, of course, you have people that are racist, that are prejudiced, that have agendas. But a lot of times, it's just simply people that are just not exposed to a different perspective.
Yes.
These are people in positions of power, and typically what do people in positions of power do when they have hiring power? They hire people that they know. They hire their friends, they hire their college buddy. And usually if you're a white person from the suburbs, all of your friends tend to be white folks from the suburbs. And so if you look at, like, let's say Marvel or DC Comics publishing, for example, most of the editorial staff are white men. There are very few women, very few minorities, because these people hire people that look like the people in their social sphere. And then the material that gets greenlit or gets approved tends to be filtered through that lens. A lot of times it's not even that nefarious. It's just simply people hiring people that they know.
Right. And that's how it snowballs,
Exactly.
whether the intent is there or not, but
Yeah.
that's how it happens. And then you have something like Star Wars, where even though it's a pop culture phenomenon, I mean, Lando was the only brother there. And from the moment you see him, he lusts after the white woman. So it's like, that's the visual. Like, I never really dug Lando Calrissian, because to me, he was like Colt 45 in space.
Well, that's a good point. And I think that Joe recently posted I guess it was a meme or an image from the movie. Like, these will be the only two Black guys we'll see in movies forever because of Black Panther. And I mean, that seems to be, I mean, even a symptom of, once people do break into that and they do get the credibility of being in film and being in these stories, then it's always those same actors. So how do we build on this and get more of those actors, where these guys are going to bring in their friends, and we're going to get more of that? Instead of seeing the same three amazing actors, we want to see even more diversity of those characters and bring back together again that heritage of Africa that many are out of touch with and has been erased from their consciousness. How can we build on this, do you see, in storytelling?
To me, I feel like it's getting people together to start their own thing. Because even with a Black Panther, like, you'll get another Black Panther, but do they have another Black superhero movie lined up? Like, that's such a huge business, superhero movies. And as far as I know, Black Panther is, it's like, since Blade, Blade started it off. And then how long did we wait before Black Panther? Like, it was like they couldn't believe that there could be a Black-led superhero film, when that's literally the superhero film that started the superhero film boom that we're still in right now. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe just get somebody starting their own, or people coming together, starting their own thing, starting a company that can kind of tell these stories. Because you can't rely on, like you said, if people are hiring people who they know, who look like them, you can't rely on them to be the ones who usher in a change where, these stories are diverse all the way across the board. We're celebrating the first Asian Marvel superhero now. Like, this is just happening. You know what I mean? So it's like, this is kind of late for us to just be doing that,
But what's funny? Like, I totally agree with that. And I always try to I always make the case because people are like, why did it take so long for Black Panther to get done? Now, why it took so long to get Black Panther to get done. However, I think there's something else that I think people tend to overlook, is that there's always been a bias against comic books as being like a kiddie thing. So you took a lot of buy-in from the studios to take these movies seriously, because think about it, like when Marvel first started getting off the ground, they had Iron Man, which was a hit, right? The next film they dropped was Thor. Now, they weren't even sure that a film about a Norse god, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norse god, was going to work. How the hell do you think they were going to get Wakanda off the ground? If people didn't believe that Thor could work, you know what I mean? They just sort of needed to build up that sort of real following where people will just buy into the brand, and then they're like, okay, we trust whatever you put out. What's interesting now is that there's a huge rush for Black content, in terms of film and television, which is good, because that's great for people like me that create original content, and I have my own stories. But like Spike Lee said a long time ago, there are very few, if any, people of color in green lighting positions. So while you have studio executives and development executives, the people that say, okay, give that the money, make that happen, there are no people of color and very few women in those powers. And that needs to change, because those people are still looking at these properties through their own specific lens in terms of, well, I don't know if that's going to sell, because it doesn't appeal to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, like David pointed out, I mean, that they look at the data, they do their little studies, and they spend a lot of time aggregating and will this be marketable and stuff like that. And I think that's what you were pointing out too, Joe. And again, that grievance that you reveal in your sense of humor in that meme and sharing that everybody loves Black Panther. And you weren't saying don't love it, but you're saying what next? I mean, how do we add to this? Why is this the only thing? So yeah, I think exposing those grievances and getting these people in leadership positions and that unique content, getting people who have unique perspectives that aren't looking for what's marketable, that what can we sell, the canned ham of the entertainment industry. It's going to be you guys leading that.
Right.
And,
And also too, there has to be a pushing of the creativity. Like, we kind of still live in this post-Matrix kind of cinematic world. The Matrix kind of dropped the bomb and changed how movies are shot, the technology and everything like that, kind of like how Star Wars did, and we never really got out of that. And we need to really push the boundaries of, like, we know that there's the struggle between good and evil, but there's subtle nuances that get you there. And we need to be able to, with that inclusion of different individuals being able to greenlight things, we have to be able to push the creative element of the stories and not follow the same formulas that, Hollywood or especially comic books, comic books is a dying, genre right now, but we have to kind of go back to the essence to break these formulas and really kind of get out of that mold, like for instance, like with comics, that's my first love, but if you pick up a comic from, the 60s and 70s and 80s to like the 90s and onward, there's a complete shift, and storytelling and the way the art is set up, covers, splash pages, this, that, and the third. I think because there were certain individuals that were in the genre that were given this lane to be able to run with, and everyone mimicked that. But there was also other guys, brothers who looked like me and you that also had different creative outlets, or they did push the boundaries, but that spotlight was never given to them. So I'm hoping now that not only can we get in positions where we can greenlight things, but also push the boundaries of creativity where we can tell the little nuances of our story that really can captivate audiences in a different way, unique way.
Is that the shift that you're talking about in the 90s, that you think that it was just less creative, or it was more
Well,
corporate,
especially in the comic boom, it was kind of like, I think that was the beginning of this pop culture stuff can sell, but no one could really figure it out. And then that was like the decline of the pop, the comic book in you, but the covers and everything like that. But you can kind of see where there was this dabble of, like, with, Spawn movie and other things, where around that time where, there was certain aspects of the comic book culture that was kind of being dabbled with cinematic form in Hollywood. But it's like when you pick up where it's already kind of messed up and then push it forward, you're still leaving people behind. You're still leaving those creatives behind that can really push things forward. So now that there is this resurgence of Blackness that's going on, I'm hoping that there's a flood of talent that is now being seen, that now has the platform to be heard, to be witnessed.
There was an amazing thing that happened in the 90s where Marvel and DC were selling gazillion copies of their books. And a group of artists broke off and left Marvel, and they went to form their own company called Image. Now, what happened was, this is like a big deal in the comic industry, but it was a huge deal for creators, because these artists, it was Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri. These were like the hottest artists at Marvel. And they were butting heads with Marvel because Marvel was like, they wanted money, they wanted more control over the books that they were working on. And Marvel said, whoa, slow down. You guys are just the artists. It's the characters that sell these books, not you. So those artists said, okay, really? They left Marvel and created their own company called Image. Now, some of their creations were more original than others. Some of them were derivative of Marvel characters, more than others. But what happened was, they showed that the artists, you need to respect the artists and the creators, because their books on their own with their own characters started selling millions of copies. They were like rock stars. And when I
Right.
tell you, if I could go
Right.
back in time and
Oh,
draw
it was crazy.
during
And
the-
ironically, led by Todd McFarlane, who created an African American character.
yeah. Now the downside of this is that when these artists left Marvel, there was no editorial control. So for example, when you draw a comic book, you know, my boss is an editor. And so when I'm drawing, he looks over my pages to make sure that the storytelling is on point, things make sense, continuity makes sense. When you don't have a boss over you, can do whatever you want, then
Right.
the quality dipped. Now, people that grew up in the, you know, people that were younger, they were like, okay, this is great because those comic books were all splash pages. The storytelling quality dropped because these guys realized, well, number one, I don't have to draw backgrounds because that's not fun. I can draw a whole story with just characters fighting.
Like fighting. That's it.
And they can make a lot of money selling those original art pages on the you know, on the retail side. On the one hand, it was great for creators because they showed other creators, you know what, I don't need to be beholden to a corporation like Marvel or DC to make money because my fans will follow me. But then the quality dipped. And then they started just cranking out crazy covers, gimmicks, you know, things to pull in people that weren't even comic book fans. It was almost like Wall Street. It was the bubble. It was the comic book bubble. So you had people who were not comic book fans coming in, buying hundreds of copies of one issue to flip it. And
Yeah, it was like what happened with the baseball cards. Like suddenly there was this inflated
Sneakers or something.
value.
when those people left, then the bubble burst and a lot of comic book stores went out of business. Marvel and DC, who had expanded their lines by like double, they were putting out like really bad books that were like image knockoffs. And there was a running joke that if you delivered a pizza to Marvel, you left drawing 2 books. They'd hire anybody because they just put out volume and stuff. And so literally at the end of the 90s into the millennium, the comic industry just cratered. A lot of companies laid people off, comic shops went out of business, and then slowly but surely they built back up the quality level of their books. You know, but it's never reached those heights.
No.
Millions of copies.
That's actually when I got on board with Marvel after the bankruptcy. You know, that's how bad it got, and they had to sell off the rights to the characters and everything. It was really dire, dark times, you know, but it was a creative. One thing about Marvel, particularly Toy Biz at that time, who bought Marvel, was that our office, like on a toy side, on the creatives, like we were very diverse. Like it was like a Marvel comic. I mean, we had Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Irish, Asian, you know, trans. We had it all, and I think that environment helped us be able to have this synergy with each other while also respecting the source material, the source, the brand. And with that just helped push us, and it propelled everything much more forward. We had like super dope ideas, and we created Marvel Legends, and then Builder figures and comic book artists got involved, and then the video game guys got involved, the movie guys got involved, and it was like this amazing synergy that really happened through the dust. But it really took the inclusion of everyone. Like Marvel couldn't afford to be one-sided. They really had to get other individuals of different mindsets and backgrounds and really recreate the magic again. And that's what really, you know, in my view, helped put Marvel back into the forefront. It was the power of the people, and not just one form of people, but it was everybody. It was a mix of individuals.
That's incredible. Hearing that, I feel like that's kind of where we are right now. It's 2020. The world has been turned upside down. Companies are losing money. They have to re-examine how they're structuring on the inside if they want to survive this. And it's going to be creator driven. I'm curious what you guys think is, so you've got these amazing creators, and like you mentioned at Marvel, this volatile moment of so much difference recreating that industry. Do you guys think there's a barrier between creator-driven content and those creators ascending to leadership roles? Do you think that there's potential for that, or where do you see the barriers there? Why aren't African Americans ascending to leadership roles? Besides the barrier of it being very difficult, do you feel like maybe people are afraid to step into those roles?
I think it's coming. I was working with Robert Kirkman, who's the creator of The Walking Dead. He's the co-creator of the Walking Dead comic. He wrote the comic book, and then it became a TV show, and then it just exploded. And for me, it was very interesting working, because he had approached me to work with him on a non-zombie related series called Thief of Thieves. And he had reached out to me and said, hey, Sean, I'm a big fan and I'm working on something, does not involve zombies. It's all about this sort of international thief. I'd like to work with you on it. So I said, okay, cool. And I had never read the Walking Dead comic at this point. This is around 2009, 2010. But I had heard of the comic book because I knew that it sold, but I never read it. But I knew of Robert Kirkman because he had put out this infamous YouTube video where he was railing against Marvel and DC and how they were bankrupt of ideas and the future of comic books were going to be the independent, creator-owned content. What was really interesting about that is that we decided to work together about a month or two before the Walking Dead TV show debuted. He was like, hey, I'm going to be at New York Comic Con. You should come up and be my guest and we can meet in person. So I said, okay. And I went up to New York and they had this whole booth of Walking Dead merchandise. And he had hardcovers of like the first 6 volumes of that sucker that were flying like hotcakes in anticipation of the show debuting. And once that show dropped like a week later, it just exploded. But I was able to sort of get a front row seat to see how he literally turned his idea that was a comic book into a huge merchandising machine. And that just reaffirmed my belief of that's what I want to do. And so in the wake of that, there's been a huge boom of independent creators that have sort of got their start at Marvel and DC working on popular characters. They build up their fan following, they hone their talent, be it writing or drawing, and then they come out with their own original content. And that original content gets snapped up by studios in 2 seconds. So this is a great time to be an independent creator putting out original content, because if you look at the way the corporate structure is happened is that, okay, you have Disney that owns almost everything on this side. Disney owns Marvel. And then you have Warner Brothers that owns DC Comics. So all of those characters are tied up by either Warner or Disney. So if you're an independent creator putting out your own comic book, people want to work with you because they just have to make a deal with you.
Exactly.
So that puts people like me in a really great position. And so people all around me that are like fellow comic creators that are dropping their own creator-owned stuff, they've got deals.
Yep.
This stuff has been optioned. It's in the pipeline to be developed. And Black Panther only blew that up for diverse content. So it's interesting seeing, fellow creatives, around like me, people of color, women, trans, LGBTQ, all that stuff. Their stuff is being snapped up left and right. So it's actually a great time to be an independent comic book creator.
And I think that goes for just about any form of entertainment. Like Joe, again, your social media is hilarious. It's on point and it's intriguing. It's fresh. It's new. It's a little off sometimes. And it slaps you in the face and makes you pay attention, which is what we're missing, I think, in comedy too, is just somebody who's willing to say it how it is, still make it funny, but still say, we got to fix this. Nobody's doing that. To make it funny, we have to soften it. And you're not doing that. What do you see going forward with that, what you're doing right now?
When I say something that's like a hot topic, it's like literally just what's on my mind. I don't think that I think that much about it, which maybe is why it's not too, I get like some pushback or whatever, but I don't get in too many fights because I think I'm not trying to push any envelopes. I'm just saying what I see and how I feel about it. But I mean, as far as like how you're gonna make content, it's kind of crazy because people don't know what's gonna happen going forward. I think like animation is gonna be huge, just in general, because we don't know how to film stuff. There's a pandemic, so I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen in the future. I'm just kind of doing my thing and
it's funny, man. It's actually, that's kind of the beauty, that we are being pushed into this realm of the unknown, because now I think the blinders are all off. Everyone has realized the state of affairs in American society and society around the world. But also too, man, like everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's in the same position. And we're all starting to see things real time at the same time. And now you can start to see other people's views and opinions play out. I kind of feel like we're the Voyager probe. It's like when we look back and we see like how far we've come, it's kind of scary. But then when you turn around and look forward, the possibilities are just endless. And we need that, whether it's going to be rough or difficult or whatever. It's just that we need to face what's coming, because clearly we can survive what we already did, so it's like, man, we survived that. We survived a lot. And we've proven that if we come together, we can push through and innovatively create other things. So let's keep doing that, especially now that we know that the blinders are off. Everyone is in the same boat. So it's like this thrill of adventure, like what is to come? What is out there? Who's the new next,
Right. And with social media being like everywhere, it's like the perfect time. I mean, there's no perfect time for what's going on right now, but this is a time when if you like a person's work and they were working for a corporation like Marvel or something, like you can just follow them and you can see what they're doing on social media. And, if you like a comedian and you used to like to see him in a TV show, you can just see what he's doing right now on social media. Right now, he can be uploading content. I'm just sitting here making videos on my own because I don't want anybody breathing on me. So I'm sitting here, I'm just filming it myself, I'm editing it myself. It's like, it's just what you got to do. And people are looking for it's wide open. All these entertainment markets are just wide open for you to just jump out there and take it.
Yeah, because humans, we have to, it's like the fireside chat thing. Like we have to watch each other. We cannot deny that. We have to see humans act out certain things right in front of us. And now with social media, it's like it's just this plethora. I can view whatever it is I want to, however long I want to. Is at my control. And then when it's at my control and I'm visiting other guys like you who are in control and controlling their own creativity, it's even that much more like, man, like this guy's really hitting what I want.
In the past, I mean, even in the fashion industry, the company wanted control over your creative property almost. I mean, they didn't want to talk about you as the designer or you as the artist. It was the corporation's name on it. And oftentimes credit isn't given to the creators. Now, like Joe pointed out, you're on social media as yourself, doing what you always do. So the company can't really control your creative outputs anymore. They almost have to give you credit because now they're aligning with your brand. And by aligning with you, they look better because nobody really wants to, I mean, it's exciting to see Marvel, but Marvel alone doesn't go anymore. It's Marvel and David Bonner. It's Marvel and Sean. It's these exciting creators that you can bring into the story and give it authenticity and humanness.
Yeah, it's a great equalizer. I'm sure that like not so long ago, if Joe wanted to get a comedy booking, he had to go and kiss up to like whoever owned the comedy thing and maybe do some payola or whatever, or try to like kiss someone's ass to get that slot on stage. But now he could just slap his own stuff up online and build a social media following like that. It's a great equalizer because for me, like there's so much content out there. I was blown away. I think it was like last year or whatever. I read like some article about how these YouTubers were making more money than like freaking Brad Pitt or, like these big Hollywood actors based on their own YouTube, clips. Yep. Like if you look at like so many of the music in the music industry, they caught this on the chin because before you had to sort of kiss up and get an A&R guy interested in your stuff and then, pay like a DJ some money under the table to get them to spin your records. Now you have people dropping their music on SoundCloud, like getting a gazillion hits and they don't need radio airplay. They don't need the structure.
Yeah. I mean, my son right now, he has an international following. He's like a basically underground rap legend right now.
Wait, how old is he?
Yeah, what's something?
18. He's
now, how do you, now, if he's got an international following, man, how do you get him to listen to you?
Well, you know what? He still pays on the couch. He still has to do his chores and all that because we're still in a pandemic. But
he's gonna make a diss record about you, man.
Yeah, man.
Well, he used his time wisely. He used, the technology that we have, and also the brilliance of connecting with other individuals like humans do. He went across borders. He went across walls, the technical way. And he bridged these relationships where he got his music up there. He met with producers, other artists and everything. And he put together this amazing EP. It's out right now, Speedy for LA. And it's crazy. And he did that all on his own, utilizing all the resources around him. And that's just one individual. That's just one kid. A year ago, 2 years ago, wouldn't even have the opportunity. You have to go through all the hoops. You got to get an agent. You got to do this and do that. And like you said, the payola and work with DJs. And he makes his own schedule. He goes on his
And
own tours. He does his own shows, and it's all
Right.
because of what he used the resources right now in the state of the situation that we're in. He didn't use it as a negative. He used it as a total positive. And if he can do it, we all can do that. We can apply our strategies and our resources the same way and get things
and
going.
I think that goes back to Garrett, something you said. You were asking, like, how do we keep the momentum going for diverse content? I think, like, when we started this conversation, you guys were talking about, like, you guys know the artists who draw the things that I've seen, but I don't know who drew it. I don't know who wrote it. You know, I know it's Marvel. I know it's Spider-Man, but I don't think about it like, you know, if I really love a particular run of Spider-Man, before this, I would have never thought, oh, I'm going to follow that artist. I'm going to go see what he's doing, what else he's working on, what he does in his free time. What now you do, especially now that we're in it's such a Wild West situation. You get to kind of just be like, okay, let me take a second, since there's not a whole lot of new stuff coming out. Let me take a second and follow these people who are creating this stuff. So it's not just Marvel anymore. Now it's the artists who drew that. It's not just, you know, this movie that you enjoy. It's what's the writer of that movie doing? What does the actor's social media look like? What kind of content are they putting out? How good is it? How enjoyable is it? And that I think will help, because I think when it's the corporation deciding, it's like, I think it'll be a fad. You know, they'll be like, oh, okay, a Black Panther blew up, let's make another black superhero movie, you know, until we feel like we're going to move on to the next thing.
Right.
So when the creators themselves are the ones that you're following rather than the company, then that fad doesn't pass. You know, it's not a phase anymore.
Especially when you have companies, man, that have like marketing departments or individuals, you know, higher up senior management, who totally do not relate to the common person, but make those decisions for the common person.
Right.
You know?
How long was Black Widow doing other people's movies? Then Wonder Woman comes out. Now they're like Black Widow movie. You know, it's like they could have done that a long time ago. It was
long time ago.
There's no reason not to.
You actually know what's funny. I wanted to say this to David, because, you know, before when I was younger and I, you know, growing up in the 70s, 80s, I was a huge toy guy. Had all the Star Wars figures from Kenner. Had the G.I. Joe, like the more miniature ones that were dropping in the 80s. But then I retired. Then I was sort of done around maybe after high school. I was done with the whole toy thing. I got a buddy who has a toy business, right? He sells the toys. He pulled me back into this, man. About 5 years ago, he gave me a figure for Christmas. And this is an obscure figure from the Alien movies, Alien 3. I don't know if you guys remember.
Yep.
At the end, they had, like, you know, at the end of the movie, like the military shows up, and they had these really cool military figures that had these sort of like puffy sort of like outfits with these goggles, all this stuff. He gave me this figure for Christmas. And I said, whoa. I mean, I always liked the design of that character, but the toy was so detailed. It was so intricate. Man, he pulled me back in. So if I could show you guys, like, now I've been buying toys, but it's just the designs of the toys that are so much more sophisticated than when we grew up. Like, you know, when we grew up, our figures could do like this.
That was it.
And then G.I. Joe, like, you could kind of do this. Now, hold on. This is a toy within like reach. I can show you guys. Look at this. This freaking blew me. Like, this blew me. The detail of this guy. I mean, it's just.
Well, you know that to your previous point about the comic boom in the 90s, it took Todd McFarlane, who was a part of that comic book boom of the 90s.
Yeah.
He basically did the same thing with toys. You know, he had, you know, Image had all these amazing characters. It was clearly like a financial opportunity for them to branch off to other, you know, forms of media and everything. And he shopped, you know, the Spawn and other characters around to be done in toy form to the Mattels of the world, to the Hasbros of the world. And they gave him the same speech, you know, like what we can't do and what we will do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when you're faced with that, what we can't do, but what we will do, you're eliminating the individual. What can you do for me? How can my character thrive? So he said, forget it. I'm going to do this on my own. And he hired, sculptors and artists that were like of comic book backgrounds and just guys off the street, like, you got a nice style. Hey, let's do it. I'm gonna work with you. And he cultivated that art. And that's another thing, man. We have to coach people up, foster the talent too, Yeah. But that him and his company, branched off and led the revolution of where we are right now as far as these toys, man. He was a great inspiration for me. And also a guy named Digger Mesh, who was also working on Giant Kiss stuff. But it was like this art boom that was kind of going on at that time, where it wasn't just, first of all, I never met a toy designer. I never met like a toy sculptor or anyone like that. I never met anyone in that field. And when I, got into that because I wanted to be a comic book illustrator, I found out that it was kind of comprised of guys who, didn't know either how to get into that industry. They just kind of stumbled into it. Like all the guys at Marvel were guys trying to be comic book artists, letterers or painters or colorists or, some form of the comic book industry making. That's what we wanted to do. And we fell into the toy stuff. But it was just such a diverse group of us.
I think that's exactly what we're talking about here is people raising people up and creating leaders and creator-driven content from people who are living these lives and people who are driving this culture, and really collaborating and then elevating into those and ascending into those leadership roles. Joe comes from the stage and improv. How are you translating that or see that? You mentioned animation, but how do you see carrying that forward into the digital space as well?
Yeah, so I mean, improv does not work without a crowd. So I don't even know if it really works filmed at all, but I think they're trying to figure that out. I don't really know. I think for online content, comedy content, there's a lot of opportunities. YouTube has been, TikTok is now like blowing up. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but TikTok is at the moment very big. I think like the most important thing for kids would be just to, take a business course or something, and just kind of figure out when you do start making money, if you can monetize with YouTube, like how can you turn that into a business and not just get some money coming in and blow it all. You can make a fortune at 16 now on YouTube, no help, with no production budget. It's crazy what some of these kids can do. So they've in some ways got to figure it out better than I do. I'm just kind of doing whatever I think is funny, which is what works for me. But I think for them, they can do it all, and I think that's kind of known now. Like the same way that that David's son has, a huge following, and he did it all just with his own music. Like that seems to be known now. The kids seem to know that they can do that. But I think the most important thing is either just having a role model who can kind of point them in the right direction with what to do with that money, or just taking the initiative to figure it out for themselves. That's like to me the only real big thing that will be important for them to do, because the internet's making it real easy to get a following.
Yeah, I agree. Also too, I think that for the younger generation, it's always a constant conversation about the younger generation versus the older generation, throughout time. But I think that with the younger generation, really understanding and utilizing the tools that are available, like being an artist, you gotta use your paintbrush, your pencil, your eraser, your charcoal. It's the same thing. It's like we have all these amazing avenues and resources, and these are tools, and to try to gain awareness of how to use those tools is necessary. But also too is like for us, it's like we have to see the talent, engage with the talent, give up information, give up the information to these kids, to these adults, to their parents, engage with them and coach them up, foster the talent, and get out of the way. Like my success came from my creative directors and supervisors getting out of the way. Anytime I had someone over me, I created their vision, and their vision wasn't indicative of the brand. When I was given, the freedom to do what I could do, then, I was able to create. And as a leader, you got to be able to engage with that, witness that, and be able to guide, be able to guide that talent. It's like a stallion, like a wild horse, you got to let the horse be the horse, but, put those blinders on, give it the rails, give it the pathway, but let that, let the horse do what it needs to do. And with the creative, whether it's comedy, art or music or science, whatever it is, you got to let that individual grow into who they need to be with the information provided to them. And I think that right now, like, that's my greatest asset and resource, that I can provide information to individuals that, they just never had the outlet to receive.
Yeah, open source information and helping each other up is a huge cultural need. Sean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just building on what Joe and David said, I think that information, like whenever I talk to aspiring artists or college kids or students, what I try to impress upon them is just information is the most valuable commodity in this world. Because people want data, they want information, they will use that information to sell, to understand more things. So what I would always say to kids is that, yes, now the playing field has been leveled in terms of you don't have to go through a gatekeeper to get your work out there or to connect with other people. But what you do need to do is basically be able to communicate what you want to other people, because a lot of times there will be gatekeepers at some point that you will have to have a conversation with. And the problem with social media is that it's really sort of degraded the socializing aspect that kids have, to be able to have a conversation with people, to be able to feel comfortable to speak, say what you're about, what you want. And that is something that I think kids should really think about. Do not be afraid to communicate your ideas or what you want, and be able to say, hey, listen, I have a question, and ask people for information. Do not be afraid of that. And also don't be afraid to ask for what you want. And a lot of times, if you don't know what you want, then you can't properly ask for what you want, and then people won't be able to give you what you want. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that is being comfortable with speaking to new and different people, collecting information, and be able to sort of hone all of your ideas, all of your wants, all of your aspirations into a very clear message that you can communicate to people when you get that opportunity. Because be prepared it's a cliche, but it's true. I say that, listen, if you're a writer or an artist or a comedian or an actor, and you happen to end up in an elevator with Steven Spielberg, are you going to be able to say to Steven, hey, listen, this is what I want to do. I'd like to work with you, X, Y, and Z. You have to be able to communicate and articulate what you want and what you're about. So that's something.
A great point. I think that ties in well with what Joe said too, and I can't emphasize enough, especially with creatives, learning business, learning finance, and learning, like you said, ask for what you want. A lot of times people underprice themselves. They don't know their value. They don't know the work they've created because they want to get out there, and they're willing to work for next to nothing to do it.
A perfect example, friend, he lives across the pond, he's in the UK, and he asked me for some advice on putting together a budget for a graphic novel that he was going to pitch a publisher. And I told him, listen, ask for more than what you want. And he was like, you know what, thanks, I really appreciate it, because I suffer from that artist fear of asking for too much. And I said, you know what, that's something that all artists have.
Yep.
We all have this, because many times we're not taught this in college or any kind of institution. So I said, I got over that a long time ago. So now I haggle about everything. I just for practice, I haggle about everything. And I watch TV shows that get me in the process of haggling. And I told them, I don't know if you get this over in the UK, but watch this show called $1 Million Listing. It's one of those real estate shows where, they have one in New York, one in LA, and they'll just haggle over stuff. And it just gets me in the mode of haggling. So whenever I enter into like a business deal and people say, hey, what's your rate? I'm like, well, what's your budget?
That's a good point.
People, like, what's your budget is, if they're not thinking about paying you any kind of money, that'll dead the conversation right there.
All right.
So if they come back at you with a number, then you can say, okay, well, that's your starting point. This is my starting point. And you always ask for more than what you want. And you have to get comfortable asking and saying, this is what I want, and get over that fear that all of us artists have, which is, am I worth it? I don't want to ask for too much, blah, blah, blah.
So in conclusion, at the beginning of this conversation, we had talked about who your heroes were as children. Who are your heroes now?
My mom and my dad, they instilled the value of an education and a value of hustling and a value of sort of just learning. Because my mom's a school teacher, and my dad worked in finance down on Wall Street. So they just wanted the best for my sister and I, and my mom really instilled a respect and a value for education and information. And my dad was just such a good networker and schmoozer. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like my mom is she's always been my hero. My wife too. My wife does like a lot. Just seeing how she engages with other individuals, how she handles business, how she, may say something that I wish I would have said, or had a certain thought process that I wish I would have had that thought process. It's very admirable, and aspirational as well, So, she's a very, a hero to me. And I think that now other individuals are really starting to understand the power of their helpmates, especially now. We're in a situation where we really need to lean on the individuals that we're close to, especially, in this whole pandemic. It's really come to the forefront, like, how strong and resilient my wife is.
Awesome.
I guess I got to say my mom then. No, she was always very big hero for me. She just recently passed, so rest in peace, Mom. I love you. I guess creatively, a lot of my friends that I work with and that just put out content that just inspires me to, seeing how they've been adapting to like being isolated and making things during the pandemic has been motivational for me. And I guess I'll give another shout out to Maya Rudolph. She helped me get over a lot of insecurities when I was first starting out. So, yeah.
Thank you guys so much for being part of this conversation and sharing your work with the world today. And thank you, Design Pavilion, Design Talks Now.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. It was an honor to be here with all of you. Really.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks, guys. It's been awesome.
Love it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Garrett, Sean, David, and Joe. You all are now my heroes. You triggered reminiscence of the superheroes of our childhood, those we identified with and who made us want to be more and better and made us think that anything might be possible. Not much has changed for creatives who always imagine a better world. And it can be better, but the system must change from the inside out now. Every example we serve up to our children affects and influences them into who they'll be. Providing positive, diverse examples of heroes and role models and products that represent each one of them and understands their personal struggles is what they need. It's what we need. Thanks for joining us as we walk along with creatives working in parallel fields. There's much more to come, so please stay tuned and continue to stay safe, stay smart. Design stands together.